Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel.
Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can provide a few examples of narcissists who play the victim. So I'll answer this question by looking at 3 examples of a narcissist who plays the victim. This type of narcissist looks for people to have compassion and sympathy for them when it's not warranted by the circumstances. So another way of putting this is that they tend to deceive. They exaggerate or fabricate stories of loss, oppression, or persecution, and then try to make sure that everybody knows about their story. They may promote it through social media, by telling people in person, any way they can get the word out there, again, about the story they made up. Now, this type of narcissist is usually thought of as a vulnerable narcissist, as opposed to a grandiose narcissist. A grandiose narcissist is typically socially dominant, confident, and resistant to criticism. The vulnerable narcissist has a lot of shame, they're resentful, insecure, and they're hypersensitive to criticism. Just like with many behaviors, this playing the victim behavior occurs on a continuum. There are people who tend to play the victim a little bit, and then there are people who really just go over the top. And that's what I'm really talking about here. The people that really take this behavior to the extreme, even to the point where the behavior can become criminal, like staging a scene or situation to look like a crime has occurred against them. This personality type actually has some overlap with factitious disorder imposed on self and potentially factitious disorder imposed on another. The latter disorder is also known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a disorder where a caregiver hurts someone in their care to attract sympathy for them, for themselves, right? Not for the person they're caring for, but for the caregiver. This situation, though, with the narcissist who plays the victim is a bit different in the sense that the narcissist is not pretending to be sick, not making it seem like someone else is sick either. They're just engaging in a number of irrational and dramatic activities to attract attention. Typically, these types of narcissists are unsuccessful. I've seen a few exceptions to this, but not many. Typically, this is an individual who has attempted to succeed. They've attempted to gain attention for a positive reason, but they have failed. So in the conventional competition we see in society, the race for status, power, wealth, affection, a good job, the narcissist has not been able to compete. And realizing they can't win in a conventional game, they rewrite the rules. They turn things around and try to gain attention for a negative reason. And of course, again, as I mentioned, they fabricate situations. They make up things. They have a high level of neuroticism and they're quite callous, so they lack empathy. So if we combine this with the criminal activity that we often see, many would qualify as being sociopathic. Sometimes they plan out their victim role quite carefully, and that's mostly what we see here in the examples that I'm going to be talking about, although much of the time it's actually impulsive. They don't think through it much at all. This type of narcissist is unusual in the sense that typically a narcissist wants attention for a positive reason. They want people to recognize how great they are, how beautiful they are, how successful they are. This type of narcissist, though, is really looking for somebody to feel sorry for them, to recognize that they have it worse than anyone else. It's really an odd expression of narcissism that doesn't really fit perfectly with our understanding of narcissistic personality. Because of this poor fit, some have made the argument that a person who plays the victim like this may have some narcissistic characteristics, but they would not qualify for a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. I think in some cases they actually could qualify for NPD. I don't think that would be unusual, and often they would have features from other cluster B personality disorders as well, like histrionic and antisocial. Now moving to these examples of the narcissist who plays the victim, for the sake of expediency, I'll just refer to them as the narcissist. As always, when I use examples, details have been changed to protect identities. So moving here to the first example. This one features someone who planned a scenario poorly, but they did actually plan it out. It was not impulsive. So consider this example. We see a workplace setting, like an office, and the pace of work is slow, kind of a boring place to work. The relational dynamics and the politics in the office play out slowly and not much movement takes place. There's not a lot of drama on a day-to-day basis. There are only a few ways for somebody to distinguish themselves and to receive attention. So a tough environment for a narcissist. In this office, we see one of the workers is a woman in her 50s. She's the narcissist in this example. She gets increasingly frustrated that she's not being recognized as a phenomenal employee. She doesn't have one particular coworker that she's really angry with, but she knows that she does feel angry, and she wants someplace to vent that anger. And she really wants people to be paying attention to her. So one night she plans to stage an incident the next day at work. She takes a screwdriver and she sharpens it, and she goes out to the store and buys distinctive valve stem covers for her car. So these are the little caps that go on the valve stem. Usually they're just plastic and don't have anything written on them, but you can also buy custom ones that have the make of the car or some of their logo on the end of them. She goes out to her car the night before she wants to stage this incident, and she places a small amount of mud on all 4 of her tires, so that if somebody rubbed against that tire, the mud would transfer to them, at least in theory. So she goes to work the next day, and when no one is looking, she takes the sharpened screwdriver and attempts to puncture one of the tires of her car, but then realizes that tires are a little bit harder to puncture than she thought. So instead, she takes that screwdriver and scratches up the paint on the quarter panel near that tire. She goes back into the building and finds one of the empty offices, an office where somebody used to work, but nobody's there now. And there's a jacket that's been hanging on the hook behind the door for a long time. So it's been there a while, and no one really knows who it originally belonged to. She takes that jacket back out to her car and rubs it on that tire, so trying to transfer the mud to that jacket. She also removes one of those custom valve stem covers that she just put on the car. She brings in the jacket, the valve stem cover, and the screwdriver, and puts all those items on the desk in that empty office. Then she goes out to her car and pretends to notice the scratches and goes back in and starts complaining to her coworkers. She can't believe that somebody would do this. Who would damage her car like that? Who would be so cruel to her? What is she going to do? Is the car even drivable? Which of course it was drivable. There were just scratches on it. So her plan is to wait for the coworkers to discover the evidence in the empty office and then connect those items to the damage that she did to her car. After this, in theory, they would run to her and say, somebody in her office must have damaged the car. So it's like she was trying to create a murder mystery without the murder, right? She thought everybody would turn into like a little detective and try to figure this out on her behalf. So kind of an unusual plan, of course, but did it actually work? Well, not surprisingly, her plan failed, and it failed pretty much in every way. So she did all this, as I mentioned, put the items in the desk. She waited several hours. She mentioned to a few people that she saw some interesting things sitting on that desk, again, after complaining about her car being scratched up. But nobody went in there. Eventually, she approached her supervisor and directly asked him to investigate these items that she saw in this empty office. She wanted to kind of play it cool, though, so she waited a little while before going back to her supervisor and saying anything else. She was confident that he would have found the items and was making the connection between those items and the damage to the car. However, she grew impatient, so she went to her supervisor and asked him, well, did you find anything in that office? And he said, I only found a broken screwdriver and the jacket that used to hang in that office. I threw them away. I'm not sure why you didn't throw them away. So she asked what he meant, and he said, well, that was the jacket that you were rubbing against the side of your car earlier. By the way, rubbing a jacket on the side of cars won't remove scratches. Also, you should really clean your car more often. It was filthy. So the supervisor had seen her during like the second part of her plan when she went back out and got the jacket dirty with the mud. But he didn't figure out the whole thing. He didn't see her scratching the car with the screwdriver. So she was not completely caught in her bad act here, but more or less she kind of was, right? Because what she was trying to achieve was broken apart. She wasn't going to get her goal. He didn't figure out, again, what was going on, but he did know that the jacket wasn't being worn by somebody else who damaged the car, right? So it kind of took away that whole idea that there was a mystery car damager running around in this office. So she went back into the office and she saw that the valve stem cover was still sitting there. He never even picked that up. He probably didn't see it. And in the end, she did about $250 worth of damage to her own vehicle, right? So none of her goals were met and her car was damaged. This is a really good example of how the narcissist believes that other people are ready to feel sorry for them at a moment's notice. Like they're anxious to view the narcissist as the victim, when most people really don't care that much. They're indifferent. They don't care about somebody's car getting scratched up that much. They're not obsessed with that. Now, even though they may be a little concerned, they're not interested enough to launch an investigation and attempt to find out who did it and make the whole big murder mystery type thing happen. So again, the narcissist just believes that other people are always thinking about them. We see kind of that self-centered orientation. So now moving to the second example. This example features how someone might play the victim in a romantic relationship by exaggerating harm that was actually done. So taking real harm and then blowing it out of proportion. It also illustrates how this type of plan can backfire when both people are narcissistic. So here we see a marriage that involves a young couple, a husband and a wife, and they are not really nice to each other. It's a contentious relationship. There is abuse going on in both directions, but the husband becomes increasingly frustrated because the wife is becoming physical in her behavior, like in the arguing. She's pushing him in some of the arguments. Now, of course, any amount of aggression in a relationship is unacceptable. Here we are talking about a low level of aggression, though. So even though it's wrong, this narcissist is really going to exaggerate what's really happening. The behavior this wife was exhibiting with the pushing is probably more symbolic and emotionally harmful than actually physically harmful. It's not like an aggressive push, like a shove. It's almost just contact and just pushing somebody away a little bit. More of a gesture that the wife does to demonstrate that she has power and control. So she can push him around and he's not going to do anything about it. Again, both people here are narcissistic. So the husband starts thinking that he's had enough of this, so he comes up with this plan to appear injured the next time he gets pushed. So not long after this, an argument breaks out, predictably, and he escalates it deliberately to make sure that the wife pushes him. And then when she does this, he kind of steps backward, like the push moved him backward, and bumps his head against a door frame. Then he calls the police and says that he's severely injured. The wife sees what he's doing, and instead of getting worried, she goes and hits her head against the kitchen cabinet and calls the police and says that he pushed her and she hit her head. So the police question both of them separately at the station, and they stick to the story, right? They stick to the story that they were the victim in the assault. So they both end up getting charged, right? So that's how it was solved. They both ended up with an assault charge. Now, of course, before it goes to court, a deal is worked out and both charges are disposed of, but still you have all this drama happening, right? Getting charged, having to go through all that, just not worth it, right? The narcissistic behavior just really didn't work for either one of these individuals. This is a good example of how the narcissist believes they're really clever, like no one can figure out the scam that they're trying to run, and they're the only one that can execute such a scam, forgetting that if they falsely accuse somebody, that person just might falsely accuse them right back. Now again, the wife's pushing behavior is unacceptable, but the way to handle this wasn't to exaggerate the problem and fake some sort of injury. That's a very immature way to try to solve a problem like this. Another interesting part about this example, if we really think about it, you have two people that, in the end, really just ran their heads into solid objects, right? So this is not consistent with a lot of insight and traditionally not considered consistent with a high level of intelligence. And this brings me to the third example. This example has a degree of planning to it, and this also takes place in an office setting. The narcissist here is a woman in her late 30s who works as a receptionist. She is antagonistic, condescending, and critical of other people, and not well liked in the organization. She has repeatedly asked to be promoted in the company, but she doesn't have the educational level for the other jobs that are available, and she's told her employer that she doesn't need the education, that she really knows everything she needs to know. So she feels disrespected, and she's made that pretty clear to her employer. Now, as part of her job, she takes messages for some of the managers who work in that office, and the company posted a job opening online. It was actually her position. So somebody called in reference to that posting, and she realized that she was going to be replaced. Right when that person called in asking about the same job that she had, she kind of saw the writing on the wall. So she left work early that day after hearing the news because she was angry, but she didn't want to directly confront the managers of that company. Instead, she came up with a different plan, one that really illustrates the playing the victim role. So this original plan was to pretend that one of her relatives died so that she could get sympathy from her employer and they would not fire her. However, if she pretended that one of her family members died, it may be easy for the employer to figure out that that didn't happen, because of course no one was actually dying. So instead she decided to send herself flowers, like several arrangements of flowers, and have the cards in those arrangements read something non-specific, like, "Sorry for your loss. Nobody should have to go through this type of pain. And we can't believe this happened to such a great person." So notice how she refers to herself as great, even in her plan to get sympathy from other people, right? Just a real lack of insight here. So the idea here would be that she would sneak the flowers in when no one else was at the front of the building, right? So she would put them on her desk and pretend that a delivery person had brought them by. Now, she was actually buying these arrangements from a local flower shop. They were expensive, and she could have had them delivered, but she didn't want to pay for that. So she was buying them and then kind of making it look like they were delivered to her. So she bought several arrangements over the course of the next few days. She tried to look sad. Now, the first arrangement that she pretended was delivered really didn't get that much of a response. Some people just commented and said, "Oh, those are nice flowers." So with the next arrangement, she made sure the card was massive and the letters were written really large and bold. So everybody would see that it was about some type of loss that had occurred, right? They would know that something bad had happened. When people saw this new larger card, they would ask her what happened, and she would say something like, "It's too tragic for me to talk about. I can't believe something like this could happen to me. I've never done anything bad to anybody." Again, we kind of see this self-centeredness here in how she responds to her coworkers. Now, this narcissist did not get caught. No one ever saw her bring the flowers in from her car. Nobody realized that she didn't really have a loss. But in the end, within a week or so, her employer fired her and hired a new receptionist, right? So her attempt to play the victim didn't actually gain her anything at all. It actually cost her money for the flowers. Now, her plan probably confused some of her coworkers, and many of them probably felt sorry for her a little bit, but in the end, she was still let go. What I find most interesting about this particular example is that even when she was fired, she kept sending arrangements for another 2 weeks. And of course, now she had to pay that delivery fee because she couldn't sneak them in. She didn't work there. So the new receptionist would call her and say, "Hey, there's more flowers here for you." And she would go in and I guess just try to make everybody feel guilty. So there are these flowers here. She was going in. She was sad. Here they had fired her and replaced her with this other person. So she was really continuing to play the victim even when there was really no potential of gaining anything from that company, right? Like they weren't going to hire her back. It was just to, again, kind of promote guilt and maybe try to cause feelings of shame and still retain that place as having the center of attention. She didn't want to let that go. It's interesting because at first it seems like the motive is purely not to lose the job, but really it's deeper than that. It's about getting the attention. It's about having people feel sorry for her. So in this example, again, we see that the narcissist really overestimates how much people care about her. She didn't understand that her behavior was so aggravating that it didn't matter what had happened to her. They were still going to fire her. They couldn't tolerate her behavior. The narcissist doesn't care about other people. They don't have compassion for others, but they assume that other people are always thinking about them. So these are 3 examples of a narcissist who plays the victim. I know whenever I talk about topics like this, there will be a variety of opinions. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.